What happens to your brain when you quit caffeine? Adenosine floods in. Every morning, your brain produces a chemical called adenosine. It builds up slowly throughout the day, and the more it accumulates, the more tired you feel. That is how your body keeps track of time and tells you when to rest. Caffeine does not give you energy. What it actually does is block adenosine from reaching its receptors, like putting a hand over a drain. The tiredness keeps building underneath, but your brain never gets the signal. Do that every day for months, and your brain adapts. It grows extra adenosine receptors to compensate, trying to get the message through despite the blockade. Now you need caffeine just to feel normal. The moment you quit, the blockade lifts. All that built up adenosine rushes in at once, flooding more receptors than you ever had before. The tiredness hits like a wave. Your brain is not broken. It is just finally hearing what your body has been trying to say for a long time. The headache. Most people quit caffeine and get hit with a headache within 12 to 24 hours. It feels like pressure building behind the eyes or a dull throb that refuses to leave. It is one of the most predictable symptoms of caffeine withdrawal, and it has a very specific cause. Caffeine is a vasoconstrictor. That means it narrows the blood vessels in your brain, slightly reducing blood flow. Your body adjusts to this over time, treating the constriction as normal. When caffeine disappears, those blood vessels suddenly relax and widen. Blood flow increases rapidly, and that sudden change in pressure is what you feel as pain. It is not random discomfort. It is your brain recalibrating to a state it had forgotten. The headache usually peaks around day 2 and fades by day 3 or 4 for most people. It is temporary, but it is also the most physical proof that caffeine was quietly changing the way your brain functioned all along. Brain fog. Around day 1 or 2, thinking starts to feel like wading through wet concrete. Simple tasks take longer. Words slip away mid-sentence. You sit down to focus, and nothing comes. This is brain fog, and it is one of the most disorienting parts of quitting caffeine. Here is why it happens. For months or years, caffeine has been artificially managing your brain's alertness. Every time your focus started to dip, a cup of coffee reset it. Your brain never had to regulate that on its own. It outsourced the job. Now the chemical is gone, and your brain has to rebuild that system from scratch. The neurons responsible for attention and alertness are essentially relearning how to fire without assistance. During that relearning period, everything feels slow and slightly out of reach. For most people, the fog lifts somewhere between day 5 and day 9. It does not disappear overnight. It fades gradually, like a signal getting clearer. And when it finally clears, the focus that returns feels steadier than anything caffeine was providing. The fatigue. The tiredness that comes with quitting caffeine is not ordinary tiredness. It is heavier than that. You sleep a full 8 hours and wake up feeling like you barely rested. You sit down for a moment and your whole body wants to stay there. It feels disproportionate, almost unfair, and there is a biological reason why. When caffeine blocks adenosine receptors consistently over time, your brain responds by growing more receptors, more docking points, more sensitivity, more capacity to receive the tiredness signal. It was compensating, trying to be heard through the chemical noise. When caffeine disappears, all of those extra receptors are suddenly wide open. Adenosine floods every single one of them. The fatigue your body delivers is not just today's tiredness. It is weeks or months of accumulated exhaustion that caffeine kept pushing aside, finally arriving all at once. Sleep helps, but it cannot fix this overnight. The brain needs time to reduce those extra receptors and recalibrate. The fatigue fades as that process completes, not before. Mood crash and irritability. Quitting caffeine does not just affect your energy. It hits your mood in ways that can catch you completely off guard. Day 2 or 3 arrives, and suddenly, everything feels slightly more annoying, more frustrating, more flat. You are not overreacting. Your brain chemistry is shifting underneath you. Caffeine stimulates the release of dopamine, the chemical responsible for motivation, pleasure, and that general sense that things are going okay. It does not flood the brain the way stronger stimulants do, but it gives dopamine pathways a consistent nudge. Over time, your brain factors that nudge into its baseline. Remove it, and dopamine activity drops. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. Tasks that felt manageable now feel tedious. Small inconveniences feel bigger. The motivation to start things quietly disappears. That flatness is real, and it is chemical. Most people move through it within the first week. As the brain recalibrates its natural dopamine rhythm, mood gradually levels out. What returns is not a chemical version of happiness, but something more stable and genuinely your own. The anxiety dip. This one surprises most people. You might expect quitting caffeine to make everything worse, but for many, something unexpected happens once the withdrawal period passes. The background hum of anxiety they had been carrying quietly fades. Caffeine triggers the release of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. It also activates the nervous system in a way that keeps you slightly on edge, raising your heart rate and sharpening your alertness. For most regular drinkers, this happens every single day. The body normalizes it so completely that the tension becomes invisible. You stop noticing the edge because the edge is always there. When caffeine leaves the system for good, cortisol levels settle. The nervous system stops receiving that daily chemical push. Heart rate drops slightly, muscles loosen, and the baseline tension that felt like just being alive begins to ease. Not everyone experiences this, but for those who do, it is often the biggest surprise of quitting. They were not naturally anxious people. They were caffeinated ones. Sleep changes. Most people assume caffeine only affects sleep if you drink it too late in the day. The reality goes deeper than that. Caffeine has a half-life of roughly 5 to 6 hours. That means a coffee drunk at 2 in the afternoon still has half its strength circulating in your bloodstream at 8 at night. It may not keep you fully awake, but it quietly disrupts the quality of what happens once you do fall asleep. Specifically, it reduces slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative stage your brain cycles through each night. When you quit, that interference disappears. Your brain is free to move through its natural sleep architecture without a stimulant pushing back against it. Slow-wave sleep increases. The nights feel the same length, but the rest goes deeper. Most people notice the shift within the first 2 weeks. They are not sleeping longer. They are finally sleeping properly, possibly for the first time in years. The receptor reset. Around day 2 or 3, withdrawal symptoms hit their peak. The headache is loudest, the fatigue is heaviest, and the fog feels thickest. This is not a coincidence. It is the moment when your brain's adenosine receptors are most exposed, and the rebalancing process is working hardest. But something else is happening underneath the discomfort. The brain has already begun reducing the extra receptors it built up during years of caffeine use. Slowly, quietly, it is dismantling the overbuilt sensitivity that made quitting so uncomfortable in the first place. By day 4 or 5, most people notice the symptoms beginning to soften. Not gone, but lighter. That shift is the reset working. Within 7 to 14 days for most people, receptor levels normalize. The brain no longer needs a stimulant to feel balanced. It has rebuilt the system from the inside, and what remains is closer to your brain's natural, unaltered baseline. Dopamine, baseline restoration. Caffeine does not flood your brain with dopamine the way harder stimulants do, but it does nudge the system every single day, keeping dopamine activity slightly elevated above where it would naturally sit. Over time, your brain adjusts its baseline around that nudge, treating the elevated state as normal. When caffeine disappears, that artificial floor drops away. The mood crash and low motivation from earlier in the withdrawal process are part of this, but once the brain finishes recalibrating, something quieter and more valuable takes its place. Natural dopamine rhythms return. Motivation starts connecting to things that actually matter: rest, progress, genuine enjoyment, rather than a chemical shortcut. Small rewards start feeling rewarding again. The drive to do things comes from inside rather than from a cup. It is a subtle shift, but people who make it through often describe their emotional baseline as more even, more grounded, and more authentically theirs. The cravings. The physical withdrawal from caffeine fades within 2 weeks for most people. The cravings can last much longer, and that is because they are not purely chemical. They are woven into the fabric of your daily life. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the ritual of a warm cup before work, the mid-afternoon break that always came with something to drink. These moments are triggers, and the brain has spent years linking them to a dopamine nudge. Even after the chemistry normalizes, the association remains. You do not just crave the caffeine. You crave the routine it lived inside. This is the psychological layer of dependence, and it is often the last part to loosen its grip. Recognizing the pattern is what breaks it. Once you understand that the craving is attached to the habit rather than a genuine need, it starts to lose its pull. When the fog lifts, somewhere between day 7 and day 14, something shifts. It is not dramatic. There is no moment where everything suddenly clicks back into place. But one morning you wake up and the heaviness is gone. Thoughts come easier. Energy arrives without being chased. This is the brain finishing its reset. Adenosine receptors have normalized. Dopamine rhythms have settled. The nervous system is no longer compensating for a chemical that is no longer there. What replaces the caffeine-driven peaks and crashes is something steadier. Energy that builds gradually through the morning and holds through the afternoon without collapsing. Focus that does not depend on a trigger to switch on. Most people describe it as feeling more like themselves, not sharper in the way caffeine promised, but more consistent, more reliable, more real. The highs are quieter, but so are the lows, and for most, that trade turns out to be worth it. What caffeine was actually doing. Here is the part most people never stop to consider. Caffeine was never a source of energy. Your body produces energy on its own, through sleep, food, and natural brain chemistry. Caffeine just intercepted the signal that told you when to rest. Every cup you drank was borrowing alertness from later. The tiredness did not disappear. It waited, and to keep it waiting, you needed another cup, then another, until the whole system depended on the chemical just to feel ordinary. The focus felt real. The motivation felt genuine. But underneath, your brain was running your own resources through a borrowed filter, charging interest every time. Quitting is uncomfortable precisely because the brain is reclaiming that system for itself. The withdrawal is not weakness, it is reconstruction. What you feel on the other side is not the absence of caffeine. It is your brain, unmedicated, finally running on its own terms.